Hi, I'm Soleil Dakota. Welcome to Musical Medicine. Tonight we have a very special guest, one of my favorite people, Marty Perlmutter. Marty is working tirelessly to save the elephants, and he brings such passion and devotion and intelligence.
Thank you.
Yeah, to the fight to save the elephants. So welcome, Marty.
My pleasure. Glad to be with you.
Yeah, thank you. Lovely to have you here. Marty Perlmutter has worked in interactive video since 1970. He did pioneering work in video art, portable video, and virtual reality. He built a major video exhibit at the Boston Museum of Science called Vision and Television. Marty produced interactive products for IBM, AT&T, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He wrote a book on interactive video production and edited the first two industry newsletters in multimedia. He runs a nonprofit dedicated to creating new ways to learn math and is currently producing a mobile math game at Cogswell College. For the past year, working in partnership with the David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust, Marty has been making ads intended to convince Chinese ivory consumers that killing elephants for bling is a bad idea.
Way bad.
Yeah. Marty, I have such respect and admiration for you and for the work you're doing on behalf of the elephants. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Marty, when I heard you speak, about a month ago here at CMCM, and I think I got the essence of it because I went home and I wrote a song. It's called Elephant in My Heart. And those are the pieces that I picked up, was Stop the Killing, I Don't Need No Ivory in My Home. So it's going to debut on this show, and I'm really excited about it.
Me too.
I have an elephant in my heart, in my heart. I hear the elephant crying out, stop the killing, no more killing. I don't need no ivory in my home, in my home. Long live the elephant, long may she roam. Do you have an elephant in your heart, in your heart? Can you hear the elephant crying out, stop the killing, no more killing. I don't need no ivory in my home, in my home. Long live the elephant, long may she roam. I have an elephant in my heart, in my heart. I hear your heart? Can you hear the elephant crying out? Stop the killing, no more killing. I don't need no ivory in my home, in my home. Long live the elephant, long may she roll.
Marty, I have such respect and admiration for you and for the work you're doing on behalf of the elephants. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
And compassion, I know, too, because this is a tough road.
yeah.
It reminds me a little bit, as we've discussed, it reminds me a little bit of starting a political campaign. We're doing some radical politics. But it's quite different. This animal rights area is different. It has different characteristics. And the dynamics of, mobilizing support. On the one hand, people's hearts are easily moved, while it's somewhat less so. And organizationally, it's really, really tough to actually bring the forces together to make something happen that sticks, that makes a change.
Yeah, I believe it. What have you learned about the conservation movement that you can share with us?
It's a tricky one because we all get the mailings from the African Wildlife Foundation and, of course, from Jane Goodall and from the World Wildlife Fund and so on. And they touch us. And often these days they say, crisis, slaughter, elimination, and then they say, send us some money. In fact, only 7 cents on the dollar for every dollar that American gives goes to dogs and cats. And I can't complain unduly about that since I love my kitty. But it's a fact that only a teeny little dribble of money goes to Wild Aid. And so that tiny little bit is then divided into 20 parts. And there are some big donors to WWF or to African Wildlife, but mostly it's small donors. And so the pile is not very big. So the staffs aren't very big. It's tough for them, and it's tough for those who are concerned about getting something done. That said, the ground is shifting right now because some really big players are starting to move into the area, and we'll talk about it.
Well, I want to backtrack just for a minute and ask you, how did you come to be an elephant conservation activist? What brought you here? I know it was about a year ago.
It was actually a bit over a year and a half ago. It was truly a calling, as it were, and you can relate to that from the musical side. I mean, the word vocation means voca, voice, a voice called. It wasn't literally a voice. But I woke up in the morning in India where I was doing some work with my wife, some volunteer work, and I said, when we get back to the States, I'm going to work on saving Africa's elephants. I sense that this crisis has really reached a peak and it needs intervention. And when I got back, there were a series of articles by the wonderful Jeffrey Gettleman, who writes for the New York Times. He has a fabulous piece that you can get online now. That were horrible. I mean, I'd never seen headlines like this in my life in the New York Times. Frenzy of slaughter. This is not, the National Enquirer. This is the New York Times on the front page. Frenzy of slaughter. And those conditions a year ago were better than the conditions are now. The frenzy it's truly insane at this point. That said, the tide is beginning to turn.
Because we were talking earlier and you said you're very hopeful.
Yeah, I am hopeful, and that's not just a condition that I've got. I am a hopeless hopeaholic. But I think that things have changed in this last year, and substantially. I mean, when I stumbled into this and came to CMCM TV to start working on spots to change people, particularly Chinese consumers of ivory's mind, I felt very alone. And though I was full of enthusiasm and hope, I had no idea who I would connect with and precisely what to do. What became clear pretty quickly was that strategically the smartest thing to do would be go after the demand. If you could slow the demand it would be like taking away the desire for cocaine. Then who gives a damn who's growing cocaine? You don't have to interdict it because nobody wants it. So if you could persuade the Chinese consumers not to want ivory, then that would change the landscape.
Are there a few people who've really stepped up, prominent people to...
Well, so Yao Ming had done some really great work a year and a half ago with Wild 8, and they did 2 documentaries, one on rhinoceri and one on elephants, aimed at Chinese audience. Those are still not completed. They're not in
I
distribution.
hadn't heard about that.
But they're going to be great. And he did a bunch of spots, short spots that are being circulated in China, and a bunch of billboards that are actually turning up in Beijing and in the airport there and so on, that say the right things. They say exactly the
What
right
is he
things.
saying?
You know, basically, it's not a cool form of bling, and by the way, the elephants have to die. They don't drop their tusks. And apparently something like 3/4 of Chinese consumers console themselves with the disinformation that they drop their tusks like deer drop their antlers. So why feel bad?
Oh my goodness.
Every tusk is a life,
Misinformation.
you know, and that important piece of information is going to get out. But okay, so that was a year ago, and then in the course of the year, politically, in Africa and in the United States, things started to bubble, and then started to boil. Senator Kerry, before he became Secretary of State, had about a year and a half ago, had hearings on wildlife poaching as an international security problem when he was the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So he's on board. He understands what the stakes are here. And then Hillary Clinton gave the most wonderful speech as Secretary of State in November. Basically, any of us wild-eyed, animal rights people could have written her speech. It just, she hit every right point. It's available on YouTube, and you can see it. It's marvelous. Her speech in November of 2012 was just a landmark. And amongst other things, she said, we've got to stop the killing. We must stop the trafficking. And we need to do a public education campaign on a global scale, because this is not just the elephants that are at stake now. Basically, this poaching crisis is destabilizing governments across Africa, starting in just below the Sahara, from the Central African Republic and the Cameroon and Chad, down into the Democratic Republic of Congo and Tanzania and Kenya. And in time, it will impact Botswana and South Africa as well. It is impacting Mozambique. So all of Africa below the Sahel is, in one way or another, being impacted today by what's happening. Why? Because the worst people in the world are doing some of this killing, a lot of this killing. The Janjaweed, remember those lovely fellows who did all the raping and killing in South Sudan? Those same schmendricks are riding their horses across Africa, and last October, they killed 600 elephants in the national park in Chad. They sell it for bullets and for AK-47 so they can do more killing. And the same Coney, that wonderful dude, the Lord's Resistance Army with his child soldier slaves, they're killing elephants across Africa, mostly in the east because their range is limited, and using it to buy bullets. So the corruption in African governments and the intervention of these heavily armed militias is creating an internal instability in countries where this is the next place where America is going to get militarily involved. And weirdly, the slaughter of the elephants is going to contribute to a political problem that we're going to wind up sacrificing our children to correct, or to attempt to correct.
And yet you feel some change in the tide.
Yes. The tide is
front.
tide's turning. People are starting to talk to one another. So one of my biggest problems in the beginning was noticing that there was very little coordination. How is it ever going to happen in an effective way? When we are up against people who are using helicopters, machine guns, night vision goggles, and are more mobile than the poor, underpaid people who are trying to protect the animals in these national parks and elsewhere in Central Africa. So how do you level the playing field? And then in come the heroes. So
Yes. Tell us.
the Clinton Global Initiative, because the United Nations General Assembly was meeting in New York, had a meeting where there were the heads of state, the presidents and prime ministers of 7 African nations across the middle of Africa. And they all announced in concert that they were going to strive for a moratorium That's what they called it, a moratorium on the killing of these precious animals. That is both, you know, the elephant and the rhinoceri. We can talk about that later, but they're kind of clustered together, both facing extinction in a short amount of time if we don't intervene in a really dramatic way. And then Hillary Clinton said that the Clinton Global Initiative has gathered commitments of $80 million that's going to be distributed across 50 national parks across all of Africa over the next 3 years to equip the rangers, get them radios, get them night vision goggles, get them better, get better weapons, and train them so that they can do this job against these heavily armed militias. And there's a certain amount of force that's going to be required in this. So that's great news. Just the disposition of, that's a serious number too for Africa. You can do a lot of damage with $80 million. They're going to gather a global concert of interested parties to figure out how to do the demand reduction thing and really make it stick. Really make it stick. That's where my work has been. And Chelsea Clinton appears to be the person who's going to be the primary, yes, she's going to be the one who I think is going to wind up owning this as, you know, she's going to be the star. And, you know, think about this. I mean, if we manage somehow to save these iconic, incredible creatures that the scientists give names like megafauna and keystone species, children will read in books 100 years from now, who did this, Mommy? Who saved the elephant? You know, and they'll read Chelsea Clinton materially and dramatically contributed to the accomplishment of this near impossible task in the face of these devils who are hyper armed and dead set on killing the last elephant for the bling.
You know, that reminded me of an interview I saw with Bill Clinton, and he asked, the day Nelson Mandela was released from prison, he woke up Chelsea and said, watch this on TV. This is a great day, and to think that she would step up now. And
well, that was, so that's 1993. And she said that when she was 8 years old, the first organization of any kind that she ever sent money to was to save the African elephant.
Really?
Yes. This is in another communication. She made that clear. So that's pretty close timing-wise, you know, to, that's really great. That's wonderful. Well, she is so eloquent and so brilliant. I mean, really, she has, as I like to say, she has her father's communication ability and her mother's brain. And it's quite a combination. She does not need to read from notes. She's a killer. Right. I mean, she's great. So having Chelsea as the spear carrier for this, as the energizer, is going to be fantastic. And so the movement, this rather sudden movement, we have Hillary Clinton, who's now committing her attention to this. We have Chelsea as an active leader, not just a participant. We have the whole Clinton Global Initiative behind this. And you have this marvelous, I think, person, you know, John Kerry, who's got a few things in his pocket right at the moment that are distracting him. Iran and Israel and Palestine, but he is totally on board. So now what's going to happen is that the government, this is, I'm sorry, I have to backtrack a little bit. The president, when he was in Tanzania in July, made an announcement that, though the money was small, he committed $10 million, which is nothing when you think about the United States. But $10 million in Africa goes a long way. He committed $10 million to specific activities that would be helpful in stopping the slaughter of the animals. And he did this in Tanzania, which we can talk about later. They have a very important role in this. But more, he said that we're going to have an interagency task force on trafficking in illegal wildlife. And that agency started rolling. They had their first major meeting. And it's the Department of Justice and the Department of Interior. Now, of course, Justice is working, but Interior is taking a little break at the moment. But Fish and Wildlife is the United States agency under the Department of Interior that enforces the so-called CITES Treaty. CITES stands for the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. And it's under CITES that ivory was first made illegal. The international trade in ivory was made illegal in 1989. Now, in the preceding 10 years, something like 600,000 elephants were wiped out in the late 70s and into the 80s, and it was a really dreadful crisis. In 89, the CITES Treaty came into play, and things calmed down very, very dramatically. For about 15 years, the elephants were pretty well left alone. I mean, occasionally a farmer would get angry and blow an elephant away and things would happen. But you're not talking about tens of thousands of elephants getting wasted.
That's
And
a
then
dramatic change.
a series of things happened. They were supposed one-off sales, where countries like Tanzania, which had big stocks of ivory, were allowed to sell it to Japan and China. And behind those supposedly legal sales, all of the illegal stuff sort of masqueraded and went into the market. Now, again, new developments. We now have suddenly a fabulous new way of dating ivory. So if somebody shows you a piece of ivory and says, well, this is legal ivory, it's like ivory from before 1989, we can date it to within 16 months using radioactivity from the nuclear tests in the 1950s and 60s. It's a relatively inexpensive and absolutely foolproof thing. So we can look at that and say, well, I'm sorry, buddy, this ivory is from 1997 and you're under arrest.
Yeah.
We can do that
That's
now.
right.
And you've got a lot of players in this, and often people are tempted to just point fingers at one dreadful evildoer. But there are many, who are causing this extinction. And I think that all commerce in ivory should stop. That there should be no way to buy it. There should be no such thing as legal ivory.
Marty, I want to mention that you're going to come back. By the time our viewers see this, you will have gone to New York to the International Elephant March, and we've been hearing a lot about that, and I'm really excited about that, and I just want you to speak a little bit about that.
Okay. David Shelter Trust is this marvelous organization that takes care of orphan baby elephants in Kenya. And it's they who came up with this idea of an international march for the elephants. And through their really wonderful organization, they've got 15 people in 15 cities around the world. In Sydney and Nairobi and Paris and Rome and London and New York, and San Francisco is going to be a participant, and 5 continents will have marches. And it is the first international march by our species on behalf of another species, which is really quite a remarkable thing.
That is remarkable.
And it will raise, I think,
really
a lot of
good.
awareness. The London March will end at Parliament, and the New York March will end at the United Nations. And the San Francisco March will wind up at Union Square. I mean, ultimately, the theme is quite simply to say no to ivory. There's this quality, it's this fierce affection, It's sort of got a symmetry with the size of these fabulous animals, the largest mammals on Earth. They're on the ground. Of course, the whales are the largest mammals on the planet, but these are the last of the great animals, on the Earth. So magical and mystical and mysterious. There's so little we really know about them, but I've heard and read just utterly inspiring things about them. Like, there's this marvelous woman who has done research for the last 30 years in the Amboseli Reserve. And watching the elephants at night, individuals, and trying to understand what they're doing as she watches them, as she observes them, she says, and she's being a scientist. She's just accounting for her observations. She says they sing to the sunset. And she says, I think they pray. We know that they can communicate 25 miles at least, through the bones in their feet, with the rumble that we can hear. If you go to the Oakland Zoo, you can hear the rumble, that an elephant emits. But their communication is infrasonic. It's below the frequency that the human ear can hear, but they can hear it. And there are theories that in the old days, before trucks rumbled across Africa, that elephants could communicate across 1,500 miles. 1,500 miles through the earth. And we know nothing about this. The elephant is very similar to the human. Human is something like, there's a number like 31 something, 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 and an elephant it's 29. I mean, we're really, these animals may turn out to be incredibly close cousins.
That is so touching. Marty, it's just such a pleasure to have you here. I feel such love for you and for the work you're doing.
Thank you, dear.
And you are so welcome. Thank you for being here. I'm honored for us to be here and presenting the elephants to the world and
Let's keep them and listen to their songs.
listen to their songs. Let's say goodnight, Marty.
Thank you all.
Good night. Thanks for joining us. Do you have an elephant in your heart? Would you like to help the elephants and protect other wildlife? Here are some ways for you to do that. Spread the word. Boycott ivory. Volunteer. Adopt a wild animal. Donate to wildlife organizations.